Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Just in case you missed it, Christmas has come of course a little bit early this year within Microsoft Flight Simulator. The franchise celebrates its 40th birthday, so quite a momentous occasion I think for those of us who do enjoy our flight sims. Personally, I've been simming for around 30 years now, starting out with Microsoft Flight Simulator 95. I'm sure some of you have been here for the full 40 years, and I'm sure that some of you have joined the hobby much more recently with the advent of course of Asobo's Microsoft Flight Simulator. Whether you are an old simmer or a new one, I think we can all agree that the occasion is well worth celebrating. And certainly Asobo would seem to agree, as of course we have a huge sim update by way of Sim Update 11. Sim Update 11 boasts 12 new aircraft coming to the sim. Further to that though, the update also boasts 4 new airports, namely we have Kai Tak, Meigs Field, Princess Juliana, as well as Kitty Hawk. We also get a whole host of historical missions, which is great to see. And Sim Update 11 also brings with it a number of significant fixes and improvements to the sim. There are improvements to live traffic, DLSS 3 support, improved atmospherics, various additional training missions as well as additional helipads and glider ports. So a really comprehensive update to the sim overall. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in and seeing what we find. In today's video we're primarily going to be focusing on some of the new aircraft, although we'll feature some of the new scenery as well. As always, if you did enjoy the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. We'll dive right in today though, starting of course with where it all began. So starting with a flight that is no doubt going to be rather short and sweet, we are now of course at the controls of the Wright brothers' one and only Wright Flyer. We're only going to be airborne as I say for a few seconds, so we'll just have a quick look around. Overall the aircraft is very nicely modelled, good attention to detail as you can see. For example, the harness here that we're currently positioned in is animated, and that does also appropriately animate and warp the wings. The same goes there as well for the tailplane. It would be nice to see a little bit more animation there on the engine. That's probably one of the weaker areas, although we do still have some animation there on the chains, the pistons there as well. Just a couple of very basic instruments, an anemometer and a clock there to show us how long we've been airborne for. You can see we are already on the launch track here, so we're ready to go. The first marker stone you can see there off on the right is actually the position that the aircraft originally started in. The first 3 markers there represent the first 3 flights. Initially the aircraft only got up to around 200 feet over the ground. The last marker you can see down there at the tree line, that's 852 feet. That was the 4th and final flight of the day. So we're going to see if we can't match the Wright brothers. We'll try and make our way down to the tree line. Obviously we're a bit limited though, we can't really go any further than that. So to launch the aircraft, just coming fully up on the throttle. Although the real Wright Flyer I believe didn't have a throttle. That'll kick the launch mechanism to gear, and off we go. That will just take some of that speed initially to get us a little bit of altitude. The Wright Flyer, to steal a phrase, doesn't really fly as much as it does fall with style, I would say. I believe on the real world flight they had a 27 knot headwind as well. Nevertheless, of course, the first powered flight and stunning achievement as a result, something I'm sure all of us are very grateful for. Rather beautiful there, seeing our shadow as we make our way in towards the ground. And we're going to cut the engine here, just shy of the marker, to get ourselves back on the ground. I do find otherwise it's quite hard to get the Wright Flyer stopped. The ground physics as well can be a little bit interesting. And there's touchdown. And bringing ourselves just to beam the final marker. So overall, good fun. Not an aircraft you'll probably fly a ton in the sim, obviously. It has limited utility. Nevertheless though, it is nice to get a feel for these pieces of history. It's very limited in terms of control authority, which makes it a really nice challenge to fly. So the Wright Flyer, certainly I think a very nice addition to the sim. Again, it's probably not going to be a daily flyer for most of you. The aircraft is pretty limited of course in most respects, certainly when it comes to speed, endurance, manoeuvrability. It is a little bit of a dog to fly, as it probably should be, and even if you manage to keep it in the air long enough, you're going to run out of fuel pretty shortly thereafter. Nevertheless, I am really happy to see the aircraft back in the sim. It brings fond memories from FS 2004, and of course it's an absolutely iconic piece of history, and one which no doubt many of us owe a lot to. Next up we're going to be taking a look at another Century of Flight classic, and an aircraft that was a real personal favourite of mine within FS 2004. Okay, so we're now in the cockpit of the Curtiss Jenny, which is another faithful recreation from FS 2004. Another personal favourite of mine as well, so really nice to see the aircraft recreated in much more exacting detail. I have very vivid memories as well of the engine, particularly interesting. Anyway, once again we're just going to come up on the throttle. and take the aircraft for a quick blast around the area. We're up at nearly 6,000 feet here, so very limited on performance. We've had to remove our front passenger just to have the aircraft really climbing away with any sort of capability. But again, lovely to see the aircraft back in the sim. Nice as well there to have the heat haze coming off the exhausts, not something we saw previously. Anyway, we'll just keep the aircraft on the ground here for a nice long time, build up as much airspeed as we can. We've got a very slight headwind there looking at the windsock. Tail just coming up. You can see eating up most of the runway here to get ourselves airborne. And up we go. Again, this sim just absolutely astonishing me today with what we can now do in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Epic there views with our shadow casting over the ground. And this is exactly the sort of flying the Jenny is perfect for, low and slow, just really taking in the scenery. I will say the exhaust haze there does somewhat hamper the view a little bit more than it used to, but nevertheless I do like the fact it's there. So again, a very short flight in the aircraft. We're just going to continue to follow the road for now. The Jenny is very lazy in roll, almost no aileron authority at low speed, same actually at high speed, so you've really got to fly the aircraft in a bit of a sweet spot in terms of its speed. In terms of pitch authority though, that's very good. So again, just following the road for now. Again, we've got the Lucky Spur saloon just off on our left wing. The Jenny, famous after World War I, a popular favourite amongst both civilian flyers and also people that enjoy putting on a show. The aircraft widely known for its barnstorming performances. Unfortunately, no open barns in the area currently, but we'll just take a quick duck down over the Lucky Spur saloon, make a low fly past of that, and then we'll call it a day in the Jenny. As with the right fly, you have to be very careful on your airspeed. Get too slow and the aircraft will snap a wing, and that'll be the end of your flight. So there's the saloon just off the nose. Building up some speed. Just clearing the windmill there. But again, cracking fun in the Jenny, really good aircraft, great for some low and slow flying. And if you can find one, great for some barnstorming as well. So for me, again, the Jenny, a really welcome addition to the sim, an aircraft that I enjoyed very much previously. The aircraft is of course far from a powerhouse in the performance department, but nevertheless, again, a really pleasant option for low and slow cruising. There's just something very satisfying as well about a truly vintage biplane, and I think it fits very nicely within Microsoft Flight Simulator. Once again, a beautiful recreation of the aircraft. I very much enjoyed how it flew as well, it felt pretty authentic to me. The aircraft certainly felt very familiar to fly, almost like an old pair of shoes, but it was great as well to see the Jenny being brought up to modern standards. Next, we're going to be taking a look at a rather unusual aircraft, and again an absolute classic in the annals of aviation history. Okay, so we're now in the cockpit of the Spirit of St. Louis, and once again a really beautiful, really faithful recreation of the aircraft. I gather in association with the Smithsonian Museum. Anyway, my memories of this particular aircraft in FS 2004 was it was a real struggle to get off the ground with a full fuel load, as of course it should be, so that's all we're going to try and do here. We've got the aircraft fully fueled up, and we'll try and get airborne, see how we go. One thing worth noting that is of interest, I believe due to drag, the Spirit of St. Louis didn't actually have a windshield. As a result, it has a periscope, which is modelled, at least to some degree, and a really nice visual effect there as well. Again, much of an improvement over what we saw with FS 2004. That's really just there to help us with the takeoff, but today, of course, using track IR, we can lean out the side a little bit as well to get a feel for tracking straight down the runway. So fully up on the throttle. Just coming up to around 2000 RPM, having to use a bit of right rudder here to keep us straight. Tail coming up pretty quickly there. We'll build up plenty of airspeed, we've obviously got plenty of runway here. Just coming up through 60 miles an hour. There's 70. Just starting to ease back on the stick, 80 miles an hour. And we're up. So lifting off just around 90 miles an hour there. I was pretty gentle on the stick. I will say there the aircraft was a little bit more straightforward to get airborne than I recall previously, which is a little bit of a shame. Some of the fun of handling these aircraft is just how limited they were on performance at full fuel loads. I remember exactly the same issue with the Vickers Vimy in FS 2004. That being said, we are just clearing the tops of the buildings here. But once again, a really beautiful recreation of the aircraft. It'd be really interesting to see whether or not it is actually capable of crossing the Atlantic in the sim. It's actually a flight I've always wanted to make, but it's obviously a pretty huge undertaking. Around 33 hours in the sim, according to the challenge. But again, really nice to have the aircraft in the sim. Probably one you'd only fly once or twice. I think the Jenny so far is the one you'd fly more regularly, but as I say, it is brilliant to have these historical aircraft in the sim, if only for reference. The Spirit of St. Louis then, another absolute aviation classic. Responsible of course for setting Lindbergh's solo transatlantic record. Another lovely piece of aviation history to have in the sim. Again, it's an aircraft you probably won't be flying every day, but as I mentioned just a moment ago, I think it's been beautifully recreated and quite obvious there that there has been a time between the real aircraft and what we see here. I was a little bit disappointed to see that the performance of the aircraft seemed to be a little bit overzealous there at a fully filled up weight. As I say, I think for me one of the fascinations with these sorts of aircraft is the flight model and just how marginal they were to flight times. Obviously the view out of the Spirit of St. Louis isn't particularly stellar either, so it's probably not a good option for sightseeing, cruising around. But certainly a model to be admired, and if anyone's brave enough, a model that you could take across the Atlantic in a mere 33 hours. Next up is another iconic aircraft, an absolute classic of aviation, and one that I know many of us have been waiting for quite some time. So on the ground here in Dawson City, now in the cockpit of the Aeroplane Heaven DC-3. This is an aircraft that I know many of you have been waiting for, myself included. Obviously it got somewhat delayed as a result of being included with Sim Update 11. So far so good, I have to say. I think Aeroplane Heaven have done a really nice job with it. In terms of the modelling detailing as well as the texturing, certainly above their usual standards, which is great to see. The same seems to be true of the sound set thus far. Obviously I haven't had a chance yet to look fully through the systems. I thought that would be interesting to hear an engine start, so we'll crank up the left engine, we'll crack open the left window, and we'll hit the starter. Obviously slightly janky there on the prop animations, and no smoke there from what I could see. So it sounds could still use a little bit of work there. I'd expect a little bit more coughing and sputtering there as the engine caught. Anyway, just a little demo for you there. We'll make our way out towards the runway. I'm really interested to see how this one handles once we're airborne. Right, so nicely lined up here now on runway 21 at Dawson. We'll come off the brakes. And feeding in the throttles. Nice shaking and rattling there as we come up on the power. Great little detailing there as well on the compass. So again, I think this definitely is one of Aeroplane Heaven's better efforts so far in the DC-3, which is what we're all hoping for, of course. Power is set. Rudder authority feels pretty good. Enough there to keep the aircraft straight. It was pretty easy to do so as well. The aircraft more or less flying itself off the ground. We do have positive rate to climb, tap the brakes and bring up the gear. Just come back slightly on the throttles now that we're climbing away. And we'll do the same as well there on the prop levers. So as with all the other aircraft, obviously today isn't going to be an exhaustive look at the DC-3, we'll do that later on. But so far very impressed with what I've seen of the aircraft, and I think it's going to be great fun in the sim. So the Douglas DC-3, many of us of course have been waiting for it in the sim, and now it's finally arrived. Overall, I think a really nice job has been done with the aircraft once again. Certainly the attention to detail externally, the DC-3 looks excellent. Internally, I think the aircraft looks really good as well, just maybe slightly more cartoonish on the texturing versus the externals. Sounds aren't bad, I think they could be better, particularly as we saw during the engine start. The aircraft was good fun to fly. I whipped it around and took it in for a landing on the reciprocal runway just hereafter. Nothing too untoward there, and once again, as far as the systems go, I haven't had a chance to completely look over the aircraft yet. The system's depth and modelling from what I've seen thus far seem to be decent. Everything seemed to respond broadly correctly, but certainly not on a par with the likes of the DC-6. So a beautiful rendition of the DC-3, one which I think you can operate in a fairly realistic fashion, but don't expect, for example, be having to really micromanage the engines or things of that nature. Anyway, departing a cold Dawson City here, heading for some slightly warmer climbs now, Princess Juliana Airport on the island of Saint-Martin. Next up is the Goose. Once again we are seeing the Microsoft Flight Simulator trick of doubling up on aircraft that we already have. Big Radials of course already produce a Goose for the sim, but we'll see what the default version's like and take it for a very quick trip around the bay. Okay, so we're now in the Grumman Goose, heading inbound towards Princess Juliana Airport on the island of Saint Martin. Obviously world famous, I was always quite surprised we didn't have this airport in the sim initially. One feature which is definitely missing currently and is a little bit of a shame, nobody's on the beach today, which is obviously most unusual, especially on such a nice day. Anyway, we'll just swing the Goose around here, we'll come in for a landing on the water. Overall, once again, as I said with my review of the Big Radials Goose, the aircraft, a nice utility as well in the sim, obviously with it being both land and water capable. I think for me, I prefer the visual modelling and quality of this particular version of the Goose. I do prefer the flight model, I think, of the Big Radials version. I think their sounds are slightly better as well. So both aircraft have their strengths and weaknesses, as is often the case. Actually getting a little bit bashed around here currently. Not much wind around, so that's quite surprising. But obviously, once again, we have had updates to the sim in terms of environmentals. So we'll keep the gear up, we'll take full flap. We'll just come in for a quick landing here over the bay. And we'll take in some of the airport here as we go. There we go, the flap. Certainly is a nice airport to have in the sim. Again, such an iconic airfield. Quite a lot of boat traffic down here in the water, so we'll try and avoid that as we make our way in for the landing. Yeah, the aircraft handles quite heavy in roll. I remember that being the case as well with the Big Radials version of the Goose. But this particular version of the aircraft does feel a bit more twitchy in pitch. Overall, it doesn't feel quite as heavy as the Big Radials version did. I suspect the Big Radials version of the Goose is somewhat more accurate in that respect. So touching down on the water, a little bit of a bounce. Nice to see. I think the water physics have been improved somewhat. It feels that way overall. Not getting the same level of bouncing around that we used to get. Steering our way here through the boat traffic. A little bit of pop-in scenery there as well. I do wish the Sobo could fix that up. Anyway, we're down. Again, overall, a really good fun aircraft in the sim and a really nice option for those of you who didn't pick up the Big Radials Goose earlier on. The Goose, again, a nice option for the sim given that it is amphibious and therefore capable of landing on both land and water. So pretty much go anywhere, do anything kind of aircraft. Again, it does have some payware competition with the Big Radials Grumman Goose. Obviously this version is free, which gives it a significant advantage right off the bat. And as we've discussed, personally, I do think this version is prettier both internally and externally. The modelling, but particularly the texturing, really is just that cut above. For me though, I do prefer the flight model of the Big Radials Grumman Goose, and I think also the engine sounds on the Big Radials version of the aircraft are that much better. Either way though, a lot of fun to be had with the Goose, and I'm sure we'll see the aircraft again in a video at a later date. Next is another aircraft that was probably eagerly awaited every bit as much as the DC-3. An absolute classic for flying in the bush, and great to see as well that we get both wheeled and amphibian versions of the aircraft. So now in the cockpit of the de Havilland Beaver, again another aircraft I know many of you were waiting for, and I have to say once again Milviz, or Blackbird as they're now known, have absolutely knocked the ball out of the park with the aircraft. Really excellent add-on, I'm pretty sure it's going to become a firm fan favourite for many. Really nice level of attention to detail in terms of texturing and modelling. Once again it has that real vitality to it that we seem to get with most Milviz aircraft. The DHC-2 really does feel alive. Good fun to fly, nice utility as well in the sim, obviously going to be great for anyone that does anything like air hauler or any other economy based add-on within the sim. Anyway, for now just making our way down the ILS in towards Iqaluit. Nice options as well, the aircraft hasn't been hamstrung it seems as a result of being a Sim Update 11 aircraft, which is great. So we do have an onboard tablet and various options there. For example, we can change out the spinner, various equipment including chocks and pitot covers on the ground. Avionics options as well, which is great to see. Also we can open the doors. So again, really nice functionality on the aircraft, and I think one of the best of the freeware aircraft available in Sim Update 11. Another really nice effort from Milviz, or again Blackbird, as I say. So once again, with the de Havilland DHC2 Beaver, Milviz, or Blackbird Simulations, have certainly delivered. Blackbird have been consistently putting out some of the best add-ons for the sim, and the Beaver is no different. Less fidelity of course than we saw with the Milviz 310, but that was always going to be the case. I was really pleased to see that the aircraft wasn't hamstrung in terms of its functionality, given that it is now a default aircraft. We still have the tablet, which gives us the external fixtures and fittings, as well as various avionics options. I love the little attention to detail, like for example here we have the kayak affixed to the struts of our floats. That's an option, it can be toggled on or off, but again I think it's a nice attention to detail. And that word for me really sums up the DHC2, attention to detail. The aircraft looks great, sounds great, I'm sure the system's depth is pretty good, again I haven't had a chance to look over that too much yet. The flight model felt pretty reasonable as well, maybe just a touch light in pitch during the landing. But a cracking aircraft without a doubt, again a really nice option for the sim, particularly the amphibian version, which much like the Goose, you can really go anywhere, do anything. In short, a brilliant option for exploring those more hidden away areas within the sim. Going from an aircraft now like the DHC2, which is really a bit of a Swiss Army knife, over to an aircraft which is more or less a one-trick pony. Right, so we now find ourselves in the cockpit of the absolute beast that is the Hughes H4 Hercules. Obviously the aircraft also known as the Spruce Goose, and you'll have seen during the takeoff there it is an absolute monster. Anyway, not too much to do here, just worth noting that most of the controls in the cockpit aren't clickable, but there is more functionality here than I was expecting, which is great to see. And again, a really nice, faithful, beautiful recreation of the aircraft in terms of its modelling and texturing. Again, some of the switches are clickable at the flight engineer station, but most are not. And similarly, we do also get a clipboard with a few basic options here. So you can see just simple things like an auto startup, auto shutdown, as well as all important cockpit curtain sliders. Anyway, we'll just go through a takeoff again, since it is quite fun getting this lumbering Hulk airborne. So power is set. Looks like we're slightly right wing down here currently, so just feeding in a little bit of left aileron. That's quite a sight to behold. You don't see that many radial engines on a wing very often. Just easing off on that aileron. And the aircraft does become airborne rather quickly, which I think is probably slightly unrealistic there. And it does slightly detract from the feeling of sheer size of the Hercules, but nevertheless, again, an interesting aircraft having the sim. Personally, of all the aircraft we tried so far, I don't really see the point of the Hercules. I don't think it's one, certainly, that I would fly very often. And since the aircraft barely flew in reality, I don't really see the need for it. But again, it is interesting to have these historical recreations. And given how many amazing aircraft we've got with Sim Update 11, I really can't fault Sobo for adding in perhaps a personal favourite of theirs. So once again, for me, I personally don't really see what the Spruce Goose brings into the sim. It is an interesting aircraft without a doubt, and it is nice once again to have a historical recreation of something we'll never see flying again. As I mentioned just a moment ago though, the aircraft barely flew in reality, so it's a bit of a strange choice perhaps to have within Microsoft Flight Simulator. And unless you do particularly want to make some long distance flights between one large body of water and another, there's probably not all that much utility to be had from the aircraft. Nevertheless, there is of course something special to having 4 radial engines on each wing. And certainly the model within the sim does give you an appreciation of the size of the aircraft. It's an interesting aircraft to take out if only the once. The flight model didn't feel particularly convincing to me, but again I don't think we're necessarily expecting a study level rendition of the Hercules. Given the absolutely stellar lineup of aircraft that Asobo have given us thus far, if they want to throw 1 or 2 wildcards into the mix, then by all means, why not? Up until now, of course, all of the aircraft that we've looked at are more or less conventional fixed-wing aircraft. But Sim Update 11 also brings with it, as we mentioned during the introduction, rotary aircraft and gliders natively into the sim. We've seen both of these aircraft types as third-party add-ons, but they are now supported by Microsoft Flight Simulator. So let's start by taking a look at one of our new Rotary Editions, and we'll see what we find there. So we're now in the cockpit of the Bell 407, on the ground at the former, rather legendary Meigs Field. Certainly brings back some memories for me, I'm sure it does for many of you as well, if you've been simming for a fair while. Anyway, we'll get the Bell airborne, we're going to take a quick lap around Chicago. And then for old time's sake, we're going to land somewhere that I regularly tried to fly this helicopter in the past. I will say that the helicopter physics in the sim so far feel to be still fairly rudimentary. They're lacking any real detail or finesse. I was rather hoping that we'd see something on a par with DCS or X-Plane in terms of helicopter physics, but so far the rotary aircraft in the sim pretty straightforward to fly. They almost auto-hover more or less. In fact, if I just take my hands off the controls here, just using the collector now to keep ourselves more or less at altitude. So you can see incredibly stable there. I doubt that the Bell 407 has quite such sophisticated auto stability, but I could be wrong. Anyway, I'm sure there's still plenty more to come in the sim with regards to rotary aircraft, but currently as it stands, I would say the likes of Fly Inside and HPG have certainly got the helicopter physics down pat better than what I'm seeing here with the default 407. Nevertheless, again, a great option for the sim, obviously, particularly with the photogrammetry scenery. Brilliant for some low and slow flying. You can land on a dime, of course. I certainly think the helicopter looks very nice, it sounds excellent as well. It is just the physics currently letting it down, but this is of course the first iteration of rotary aircraft physics in the sim, at least officially, so I'm sure we, as I say, will see improvements going forward. I spent so many hours over the years though in various sims, all the way back through to FS95 flying around Chicago. It was the default airport, as I'm sure many of you know, within most Microsoft flight simulators previously. Sadly though, Meigs was eventually closed down and actually dug up, much to many people's surprise at the time. Just come up slightly higher here on the torque just to get us around the city a little bit quicker. So yeah, Meigs doesn't generally tend to feature in the sim anymore, though of course we do now have a nice custom scenery of the airport. Not accurate, but I think it does pay a nice historical tribute to the Microsoft Flight Simulator franchise. As I'm sure most of you know, Chicago of course sits on the shores of Lake Michigan, just off on our left currently. It's a pretty sizable lake though, so for many years of my childhood I was convinced that Chicago was actually on the coast. I thought it was a seaside city. Again though, excellent detail on the photogrammetry. Really amazing. I mean, if you compare this with what we had in the likes of FS95 all the way through to even the last iteration of the sim, it's just something I'm sure many of us never dreamed would be possible in the sim. So it's really nice today to celebrate 40 years of flight simulation and just how far things have come. You can see I am spending a little bit longer here with the helicopter since it is new to the sim. Obviously the other aircraft we've looked at, it really just comes down to a question of detailing in terms of texturing and modelling. I'm finding the Bell 407 enjoyable enough so far, but again, very easy to fly. So really a good option for cruising around, taking in the scenery without having to think too much. Certainly if you're trying to do the same thing here in the Fly Inside Bell 47, you'd be kept a little bit busy of flying the aircraft at the same time. Anyway, I said we'd land somewhere pretty familiar. Again, this stadium stands out for me as one of the things I must have seen countless times in the sim over the years. And I think, as with pretty much all of us, I've had a few attempts here at landing in the stadium in the past, and we'll do the same here again today. Shouldn't be too much wind around, so we'll just bleed off some speed here in a little bit of an orbit. And we'll come back in towards the south, put the Bell 407 down. You can see though the helicopter very easy to control. I'm by no means typically a rotary flyer. Getting a little bit low there on the approach, so just feeding in a little bit of collective, just clearing the tops of the grandstands. Once more, very easy to control. More or less just point the aircraft in the direction you want to go. Seems like we do have a little bit of a crosswind. We'll put ourselves down on the horseshoe. And off the collective. There's touchdown. So again, by no means a study level rendition of a rotary flight model, I would say. Certainly leaves a lot to be desired versus other sims still, but really nice to have helicopters now native within the sim, and hopefully we'll see things continue to go from there. Without a doubt, it is lovely to see a Bell helicopter back in the sim, and indeed helicopters back in the sim. A Microsoft Flight Simulator really ought to have a couple of rotary aircraft, some gliders, a nice wide range of aircraft options available, and I think that sort of variety that we historically had is one of the reasons the sim has been so successful over the years. So it's great to see this latest iteration of the sim find its feet a little bit once again there. Brilliant as well to be back on the ground in Meigs, again an absolute classic of the sim. As far as the Bell 407 itself goes, again a very beautiful rendition of the aircraft in terms of visual modelling. Sounds I thought were good as well. Flight model I think we've discussed in depth. Certainly there's still quite a bit of work to be done, it seems, with the rotary aircraft physics within the sim. Pretty basic still at the moment. The aircraft felt very stable, very easy to fly, didn't seem to be any physics modelled in terms of vortex ring state, retreating blade stall, things of that nature. But obviously this is just a starting point, and hopefully it opens up a whole host of avenues for third-party developers to improve upon what we have. Obviously we have had some third-party developers already create rotary aircraft within the sim, much the same is true of gliders. Gliding is now natively supported within Microsoft Flight Simulator, and to make use of the new physics we have 2 new gliders available in the sim. We're now going to take a look at the DG Aviation LS818. So we are now on the ground in the DG LS818, one of the native gliders to the sim. Obviously we've had a few third-party gliders already from the likes of GotFriends. Really nice addition to the sim though, and again really nice functionality now with the additional gliders. For example, here you can see we do have a tow plane by default, and a really nice touch as well, we have a little guy guiding us on the wing initially for the takeoff. There are quite a number as well of glider ports included within the update, which is great. Obviously we can't cover all of those today, but they're pretty well spread around, and there are again quite a few of them. Anyway, to get our flight underway we just need to give a couple of flicks there on the rudder pedals just to notify our wing walker there that we're ready for takeoff. He gives the signal. Again, I just love the attention to detail there. The Sobo easily could have done without that. So he'll initially follow us through on the wing till we've got enough lift there to have some aileron authority. One thing I have noticed with the default gliders, the rudder sensitivity definitely suffers from typical Microsoft Flight Simulator issues in terms of a little bit overly sensitive. Can be quite tricky to keep the aircraft straight. You really have to absolutely minimise your rudder inputs. So tow plane just lifting off. You can see we've got pylon straight off the nose, not the most optimal location for a runway. Anyway, we'll follow the tug for now, we'll keep close in behind him, try and stay out of his wake. That doesn't seem to be modelled in the sim though, to be fair. In terms of wake turbulence, that is. I was told in my previous video with the GotFriends Discus 2C that we ought to keep the wheels down until we finish with the tow, so we'll do that. But I do listen to people when they comment. It's always interesting to learn new aspects of any type of flying in the sim. Always appreciate your comments. Anyway, just sticking in behind the tow plane for now. We're not going to go for a full tow here today. Again, we're just taking a very quick look at most functionality in the sim. So we'll cut our tow, we'll peel off to the right, the gear can come up. I'm not going to wax lyrical too much here about the virtues of gliding in the sim. I think I did plenty of that in my review of the GotFriends Discus 2C, but I think it's an absolutely excellent way to fly in the sim. Really make the most of the beautiful scenery. We'll swing back round to the left and just come in for a very quick landing back on the reciprocal runway. And we'll get rid of the variometer there as well, just so we can enjoy a little bit more serenity. Yeah, gliding for me has to be one of the real treasures within Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's such a serene way to fly. And obviously we now have the scenery for it. Previously I didn't really see too much point with gliding in the sim with the quality of scenery that we had. Anyway, as I say, we'll just make our way back towards the reciprocal runway here. Overall, the glider flies very nicely, pretty much as you'd expect, broadly on a par with the likes of the Gotfriend's Discus. The only thing I have noticed, again, the rudder authority feels a little bit strange. Same is true on landing, it can be quite wallowy at times, quite slow to respond. There are some nice features though, for example we can dump ballast, so we'll do that now. We do get an associated sound effect there as well as some visuals. So really nice attention to detail. I couldn't figure out whether or not you could open up the canopy, I didn't seem to be able to. Take the gear down once again. Just keep the speed brake off until we're sure we're going to clear these pylons. We are pretty fast here now, so we'll start taking some speed brake. I don't know whether it's just me, I feel the speed brakes are perhaps a little bit underpowered currently. It does still take quite some time to bleed off speed. If memory serves me correctly, it really felt like you were pretty much coming down in an elevator, deploying the speed brakes in a real world glider. Anyway, happy we're going to make the runway. We'll keep the speed brakes, keep that speed coming back. And just holding the aircraft off, trying to get a nice smooth touchdown. There we go. And we'll just keep the wings level as long as we can here, just to avoid touching them on the ground too early. Onto the brakes. And bringing ourselves to a stop. As mentioned, I think I've already made my feelings on gliders within Microsoft Flight Simulator very clear with my review of the Gotfriend's Discus 2C. That was an absolutely stunning flight, so feel free to go and watch that video if you want to see some more extended gliding within the sim. It's certainly nice to have the aircraft supported natively now, although I don't think it brings anything new that we didn't already have with the third-party add-ons. Glider physics felt pretty reasonable. I did notice the aircraft got off the ground actually after the tow aircraft there, which is a little bit strange. I mentioned the issues with the rudder, that's obviously pretty common in the sim. And similarly, we've already discussed the speed brakes there, and perhaps that is accurate to the real-world aircraft, I'm not entirely sure. Certainly though, the models of the gliders, as you'd expect, are pretty stunning. I love the animations, the effects as well with the water drop. Wing flex looked excellent, and there is just really something about looking over those high aspect ratio wings, enjoying the scenery of the sim. It's really quite tough to beat. Another huge pro for me is the inclusion of the native tow aircraft. You can also winch launch. I haven't looked into that myself yet. And once again, I thought the guy on the wing, just keeping the wing up there until you've got enough airflow going over, was a really nice touch. Adds to the immersion just that little bit more. It seemed to me that the launch functionality worked at any airport, which is excellent. It would be brilliant as well if the sim would recognise third-party gliders and offer the same functionality. But anyway, a really enjoyable way of flying in the sim, and obviously it's all the more accessible now, so I highly recommend going and giving it a go for yourselves. From arguably the simplest aircraft that we've taken a look at today, we've saved the best till last, the one I'm sure you've all been waiting for, and we are now of course going to take a very brief look at the Airbus A310. And last but by of course no means least, we are going to take a very quick look here as well at the Airbus A310. Just take the gear down, speed rolling back towards 160 knots. The 310 of course is the icing on the cake really with Sim Update 11. It is a very detailed rendition of the aircraft. And I think it'd be fair to say it's the most detailed rendition of a default aircraft that we've seen in any flight simulator to date, so that really goes to enhance what Microsoft Flight Simulator has to offer as a sim platform, I think. Bring the speed back towards 140 knots. I'm not all that familiar with the aircraft myself yet, so I didn't want to do a full flight here today. Instead I thought we'd just briefly take a look at the aircraft, but so far what I've seen I'm very impressed. Great flaps full. We've got auto brake low. Obviously we're not flying the full IGS approach here today, we're just going to fly an approximation of the turn through onto final. I really enjoy this vintage of jet though. It's great having both the mechanical gauges as well as the automation to back it up. I think it's a really interesting vintage of aircraft. So we've got the lead-in lights here just off the nose. We're slightly inside our turn currently, so we'll just maintain our heading a little bit longer. And we can just start a shallow turn now around onto final. We'll keep the auto throttle in until we're lined up with runway 13. The aircraft does feel a little bit more wallowy and slow to respond than I was expecting, but that may well be true to life. I've never flown a non-fly-by-wire Airbus before. A little bit high on the pappies. Happy we can correct that. So auto throttle can come out. And looking good now on profile. Certainly I'd like to revisit Kaitak at a later date. Same goes for the aircraft. We're definitely going to carry out full flight in the aircraft. Off the throttles. There's touchdown. Just go idle reverse. And we'll let the aircraft bring itself through to a stop. So even though we only got the chance to take a very short look at the Airbus A310 there, I think it's very clear that it is an exceptional aircraft to have in the sim by default. And once again, at least to my memory, it must be by far and away the most in-depth default aircraft we've seen in any sim to date. That's great for all of us, of course, and I think it's a great thing as well for Microsoft Flight Simulator as a platform. I wouldn't say the A310 is currently flawless. There were one or two details I felt could use some work. I'm not going to touch on those too much here today. I'm sure we will continue to see the aircraft be developed. Generally speaking though, once again a very beautiful rendition of the jet, both internally and externally. As we've talked about already, I do particularly enjoy this vintage of jet with both the mechanical gauges as well as the EFIS system. And the A310, something a little bit different. For me, certainly very interesting to see a previous iteration of the Airbus. On the one hand, you can certainly see a lot of the foundations for the more modern Airbus fleet, but similarly there are some fairly significant changes. I'm definitely really looking forward to getting stuck into the 310. As I say, we'll definitely be carrying out a full flight in the aircraft. Maybe some sort of a tutorial series as well, could be good fun. Systems depth on the aircraft is without a doubt excellent. The flight model to me did feel as though it was lacking a little bit in inertia. Again, maybe it's just a case of getting used to the lack of fly-by-wire. And once more, I suspect we will see refinements to the aircraft going forward. It was brilliant as well to see Kaitak in the sim, stunning scenery there on the way in. As I say, definitely planning on revisiting Kaitak at a later date, and hopefully the A310 in fairly short order. Anyway, ladies and gents, that just about completes our overview of Sim Update 11 here today. Obviously a fairly informal look at the update there, not looking at any aircraft in significant depth. Really just taking the time to showcase the new aircraft, the new sceneries, having some fun along the way. I certainly feel, and I'm sure that many of you will agree, that Sim Update 11 is an absolute triumph. Hats off to Asobo. By and large, an amazing selection of aircraft, some really nice new additions to the sim, and if nothing else, a very generous free gift when you consider the significant costs that Asobo must have had to outlay to bring these add-ons to us. I think the new aircraft additions certainly go towards making Microsoft Flight Simulator a more varied, more interesting, and indeed more capable platform. I had a lot of fun here today. We'll definitely be revisiting a lot of these aircraft in future videos. I hope you enjoyed the video as well. Once again, if you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Thank you once again to Asobo, a very happy birthday to Microsoft Flight Simulator, and lastly a very big thank you as well to my channel members and patrons. I do hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Have a great weekend with Sim Update 11, enjoy some flying, and I will see you all again soon.